The wind sliced through the narrow streets of Whitefish, Montana, a tourist town that turned into a secluded retreat in the winter, surrounded by thick forests and snow-covered mountains. It was the kind of place that looked picture-perfect on postcards, but hid a silence too heavy to be just peaceful. The wooden houses, their fronts bleached by the cold and chimneys letting out faint trails of smoke, gave the feeling that the locals would rather ignore certain secrets than face them. The black Mustang moved slowly down the main road, standing out among the ice-covered SUVs and pickup trucks. Behind the wheel, Steve adjusted his leather jacket while watching the fog's reflection on the hood. Next to him, Joanna flipped through a notepad filled with scribbled names and dates. 3 disappearances in the last 2 months, she murmured, not looking up. All young. No bodies found. Steve raised an eyebrow. The police say they ran away. Troubled teens looking for a fresh start. He made air quotes with his fingers, clearly skeptical. A little too convenient. Joanna snapped the notepad shut. Convenient or not, the parents swear they never would have just left without saying anything. Something's off. The siblings pulled up in front of a rustic-looking cafe, one of the few places still open on the main street. Ski tourists were scarce on those gray days, and the place seemed filled with nothing but locals. As they stepped inside, the thick warmth clashed with the cold outside. But it didn't feel welcoming. Every head turned toward the strangers, like each customer was silently wishing they'd leave. At a table in the back, a middle-aged man fidgeted with his coffee cup. "You the sheriff?" Steve asked, walking up with a professional smile. The man looked up, sizing them both from head to toe. Before he could answer, Steve pulled a black leather wallet from his jacket and flipped it open, revealing a carefully forged fake badge. "Agent Collins, FBI." He nodded toward his sister. "This is Agent Moore. We're looking into possible interstate links between missing teens." The sheriff hesitated, his fingers tapping on the coffee cup. Then he adjusted his worn-out hat and gave a slow nod, the kind that said he wished the feds had stayed out of his town. "If you're here about the kids," he began, voice low and almost conspiratorial. "There's nothing criminal going on. Just lost causes. Ran off on their own." Steve tilted his head, pretending to jot something down in a notepad. "And yet they all left behind their clothes, IDs, and phones. That's not exactly typical, is it?" The sheriff cleared his throat, glancing toward the fogged-up window. "We didn't find any signs of a crime. Just teenage mess." Joanna leaned in, her tone calm but her gaze sharp enough to cut through him. "Mess that now adds up to 3 disappearances in less than 2 months." She let the sentence hang, watching his reaction. The sheriff didn't answer right away. He stirred his coffee like the drink might offer an excuse. In the end, he just repeated the rehearsed story. Voluntary runaways, no proven crime, case closed. Joanna watched him closely, analyzing every move. The tight jaw, the eyes that looked away too quickly, the voice that sounded too practiced. Once they were outside, she simply said, "He's hiding something." Back in the car, Steve opened his laptop and connected to the town's spotty internet. He dug through old newspapers and police records until he found vague mentions of a group called The Flesh and the Blood. Apparently a cult that preached freedom through pain and letting go, drawing in mostly troubled young people. "Just another dumb cult," Steve said, resting his chin on his hand. "Probably half a dozen fanatics playing around with torture." But Joanna didn't look so sure. Fanatics can be dangerous, especially when people start going missing. They drove out to the edge of Whitefish, where the ski cabins gave way to abandoned warehouses and snow-covered roads. One building stood out. Surrounded by tall trees, it was covered in graffiti and strange symbols on the outer walls. The broken windows let out a stale smell of mold, mixed with something metallic, almost like blood. Steve turned off the engine and stared at the building in silence. The wind whistled through the pine trees and the gray sky felt heavy above them. Joanna pulled out her notebook, jotting down the location in firm handwriting, like she already knew this town was hiding more than it wanted to admit. At that moment, they still believed they were just dealing with another violent human cult. But the Myers' instincts already knew. Something much darker was lurking in Whitefish. Night fell over Whitefish, bringing a cold sharper than usual. The wind blew through the pine trees, scattering snowflakes across the dimly lit streets. In the plain motel room where they were staying, Steve had spread a pile of crumpled papers and printed clippings across the table. Joanna sat at the edge of the bed, cleaning the blade of a short knife while reading over her brother's shoulder. "Check this out," Steve said, pointing to an old article from a local newspaper. 15 disappearances back in the 90s. All young people, no history of running away, desperate parents, and not a single lead. Joanna narrowed her eyes. "And let me guess? The cases were never solved." Steve flipped through another file. In 1974, same number. And again in 1952. Always a big group, always around 15 to 20 young people. Looks like a cycle. Next to the table, the laptop displayed a rough spreadsheet with columns of names, ages, and dates. Almost all the missing were under 25. Many were described as troubled, going nowhere, or in conflict with family. A perfect pattern for disguised recruitment. Steve leaned back in his chair, pointing to the old headlines. Always groups of 15, every 70 or 80 years. Long enough for people to forget, for it to turn into just another local legend. This isn't a coincidence. Joanna narrowed her eyes. So it's not just some crazy cult. It's organized, and it knows how to wait. On the table were also police photos from past investigations. Clothes scattered on the ground, open backpacks, dark stains in the snow that reports only described as inconclusive residue. Steve zoomed in on one of the images. A long mark on the ground, like something had been dragged across the frozen dirt. "This wasn't a runaway," Joanna murmured. "This was a hunt." She stood up, walked to the window, and pulled back the curtain. The street was empty, except for a young man standing under a broken streetlight, hunched in his coat, watching the motel. He didn't look like a hunter or someone keeping watch. He looked lost, haunted. Joanna exchanged a quick glance with her brother, then opened the motel room door and stepped out toward the boy. The cold bit at her skin, but the tension in the air was stronger. "Hey," she said, firm but not aggressive. "What do you want with us?" The boy looked around like he was afraid someone was following him, and his voice came out low and shaky. You were asking about the missing people. I saw it. No one here believes me. They think I'm making it up, but it's real. The cult, they call themselves the Flesh and the Blood." Joanna studied him for a moment, seeing the real fear in his eyes. She gave a subtle signal and led him into the room. Steve had already put the papers away by the time the boy stepped in, shaking, his eyes darting around like he expected someone to step out of the shadows. He spoke in fragments, about rituals involving pain, about new members being forced to drink blood, about promises of freedom and strength. He said the cult lured in young people with the illusion of a perfect family, where no one would be weak or abandoned. A lie carefully crafted by the leaders. "They say pain is freedom," the boy whispered, tears in his eyes. "But in the end, it's just blood. Always blood." Steve and Joanna exchanged a quiet glance. Now they had a name, a pattern, and a clear direction to follow. The morning cold in Whitefish felt heavier as Joanna left the motel, following the direction the boy had given her the night before. The place was an old abandoned sawmill on the edge of the forest, with rotting wood panels and shattered windows. Despite its ruinous appearance, there were clear signs of recent activity. Footprints in the snow, burnt candle stubs near the entrance, and symbols carved into the wood with a knife. She took a deep breath and knocked on the door. A tall man with a narrow face and guarded eyes opened it partway, sizing her up in silence. Joanna stepped into the role she'd prepared, the lost girl searching for meaning. "I heard about you, about the flesh and the blood." Her voice sounded hesitant, but filled with believable anguish. "I want to understand. I want to be part of it." The man held her gaze for a long moment, then finally stepped aside to let her in. Inside, the space was lit by torches mounted on the walls, the air thick with smoke, sweat, and something else metallic, hard to ignore. A group of young people sat in a circle, all with hard expressions, some showing scars on their hands or arms. A gray-haired woman who seemed to lead the gathering raised her voice. "There is no weakness here, no abandonment. The flesh and the blood welcomes the strong and turns them into predators." Her eyes locked onto Joanna. "Are you ready to leave your old life behind?" "I am," Joanna answered firmly, keeping up the act. Meanwhile, Steve was still at the local library, surrounded by stacks of dusty newspapers and old microfilms. The pattern grew clearer with every page. Disappearances in 1871, again in 1951, and now this current cycle. In each interval, about 15 young people vanished without a trace, all fitting the same profile. The oldest articles spoke openly of a cult, but in recent records it had faded into folklore, a rumor told in bars to scare teenagers. Steve scribbled quick notes in his notebook. This wasn't just superstition. It was a calculated system of recruitment and sacrifice. And the name, the flesh and the blood, showed up again and again, a shadow passing through generations. Back at the sawmill, Joanna was led in with the others. The walls were covered in phrases painted in red. Pain is purity. Blood is life. A young man with a bandaged arm leaned in and whispered to her, "The first step is accepting pain. They'll test you." Then he looked away, as if afraid he'd said too much. The gray-haired woman lit more candles, filling the air with a nauseating smell of burning tallow. "Night will fall," she said, "and with it comes the baptism. Only then will we see who is worthy." Joanna kept her expression steady, but every detail she took in confirmed what Steve had already begun to suspect from his research. This wasn't just a human cult. It was a cycle, carefully prepared, masked behind symbols and promises, meant for something far greater. Inside the abandoned sawmill, the air was thick with smoke and sweat. Joanna stood in line with the other young recruits, all with their heads lowered. The gray-haired woman, called Sister Helena by the others, handed out small leather whips tipped with iron. "Pain opens the door," she said firmly. "Those who can't endure it aren't worthy." One by one, the newcomers struck their own backs, groaning or gritting their teeth under the cold stares of the older members. When her turn came, Joanna raised the whip and struck without hesitation, leaving shallow marks that looked convincing. She felt the leader's approving gaze. Soon after, one of the veterans brought in a metal bowl. The sharp scent of iron filled the room, animal blood still warm. Makeshift cups were passed around and each recruit was forced to drink. Joanna swallowed as little as she could, keeping her expression steady. Around her, the young people shook, some nauseous, others smiling like they believed they were rising into something greater. Meanwhile, Steve was digging deeper into his investigation at the library. Among forgotten records, he found a personal journal from a pastor in the 1870s. The pages spoke of missing youths and a strange mark carved into trees near the river. A circle crossed by two curved lines. The pastor described it as the seal of the night predators. Steve sketched the symbol into his notebook. Hours later, in a quick check through his father's old hunting journal, something he always carried, he found a match. It wasn't satanic or tied to common witchcraft. It was a vampire sigil, used to mark hunting territory and warn rival clans to stay away. Back at the sawmill, Joanna noticed the same symbol etched into the walls, hidden beneath layers of red paint. The cult claimed it represented the union of body and spirit through blood. But now she knew better. It meant something else entirely. The days that followed brought more trials. Recruits were forced to lie in the snow, exposed to the cold, while veterans chanted. Others were made to fight each other, tests of strength and obedience. With each ritual, the same promise was repeated. Pain sets you free, blood makes you strong. Brothers don't abandon each other. Joanna kept up her cover, mentally recording every detail. The rigid hierarchy, the blind devotion, the growing number of recruits. They were almost at 15. The count matched the pattern Steve had found in the records. Back at the motel, Steve spread his notes out across the bed, comparing dates, symbols, and witness accounts. "They're not just fanatics," he muttered to himself. "They're feeding something." And for the first time, the suspicion came into focus. The cult wasn't the end. It was just the means. Someone or something was waiting for the right moment to rise. Hey, before the blood starts spilling, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. The algorithm's colder than a vampire with anemia, and without your subscription, we vanish like a reflection in the mirror. So subscribe, hit the bell, and let's hunt down these audience-sucking leeches together. The full moon lit up the clearing deep in the forest. reflecting off the snow like a grim spotlight. The cult members marched in silence, carrying torches that cast long, flickering shadows across the frozen trees. Joanna walked among the new recruits, her back still stinging from the previous trial's whip. The air smelled of smoke, sweat, and that now all too familiar metallic scent. At the center of the clearing stood a ring of ancient stones. Their surfaces were covered with symbols identical to the ones Steve had identified as vampiric sigils, though here, they were presented as the cult's sacred marks. The veterans lined the newcomers up inside the circle and ordered them to kneel. Sister Helena raised her arms, her voice echoing with authority. "Brothers and sisters, this is the night when flesh and blood become one. Tonight the strong will be reborn, and the weak will be consumed." Two men dragged a young woman into the center, bound and clearly a kidnapped victim. The terror in her eyes pierced the darkness more than any torch. The recruits, Joanna included, were forced to repeat a chant. Blood is life. Pain is freedom. Blood is life. Pain is freedom. The words echoed through the forest until a heavy silence fell. From deep among the trees, tall figures emerged, moving fast like predators. Three pale men, their eyes glowing and fangs exposed, stepped into the clearing. Vampires. The cult veterans bowed instantly like worshippers before gods. One lifted the tied-up girl as an offering. The vampires didn't hesitate. The first one sank his teeth into her neck, blood spilling across the white snow. The other two circled the recruits, sniffing the air, choosing their prey. Joanna's disguise kept her safe for now, but her heart pounded as the full truth unfolded before her eyes. The cult wasn't the real threat. It was just a front, a herd of humans offering victims in exchange for being spared. The leaders had built the whole show of pain and trials only to prepare young bodies for the feast. The vampires raised their blood-covered faces, surrounded by red-stained snow, while the cult chanted in a trance-like devotion. And there, in the middle of that horror, Joanna finally understood. This wasn't just a cult of fanatics, it was a pact of servitude, sustaining ancient, insatiable predators. Hold up. Before we move on, let me ask you something. Ever felt stuck? Like your mind's in the dark and not a single idea feels worth it? Yeah, me too. That's exactly why I created a kind of creative emergency button. I call it the Idea Factory. It's a practical guide that turns writer's block into a starting point. Instead of waiting for the perfect idea to fall from the sky, you trigger it using questions, prompts, and creative exercises. There's a class pinned in the first comment that explains how it works. It's simple, quick, and it might just change the way you see writing forever. Now get ready, because the next scene, it's going to make your knees shake. A scream echoed through the forest as the vampires charged at the recruits. Joanna, still inside the circle, held her ground, but one of the predators locked eyes with her, approaching with slow, deliberate steps. He sniffed the air, as if sensing something different about her. Before he could strike, a glass vial shattered against his chest. The vampire recoiled, howling, smoke rising from his burning skin. Steve emerged from the trees, shotgun in hand, a bandolier strapped across his chest packed with vials of dark liquid. "Dead man's blood, you piece of crap," he growled, reloading the weapon. The clearing erupted into chaos. The vampires lunged at him with inhuman speed, tearing through trees and sending snow flying. Steve fired shot after shot, each vial exploding against pale, twisted bodies. The monsters roared but didn't back off for long. Joanna used the confusion to grab a knife from the belt of one of the human guards. With a quick, precise slash, she freed two of the tied recruits, yelling for them to run. But the cult members didn't move. They remained kneeling, glassy-eyed, chanting like they were witnessing a divine revelation. A vampire pounced on Steve, slamming him into the snow. Its fangs gleamed in the moonlight, but Joanna rushed in from behind, stabbing the creature in the shoulder. The monster roared and threw her against a tree, knocking the wind from her lungs. Steve seized the moment, pulled the machete from his back, and with brutal strength, sliced through the vampire's neck. The head rolled through the snow as the cult's chanting grew louder, almost ecstatic. The two remaining vampires charged together. Steve hurled an improvised grenade, glass and gunpowder mixed with dead man's blood. It exploded into a cloud of acidic smoke, slowing them for a few precious seconds. Joanna rose unsteadily, blood dripping from her forehead, but her eyes locked on the threat. The fight was uneven. Every strike from the vampires shattered branches, cracked ice, and left deep gashes. Steve and Joanna moved in sync, attacking, retreating, searching for an opening. But it was clear. One mistake, and they'd die right there. In the center of the clearing, the cultists clapped in a trance, convinced they were witnessing the rise of their blood gods. None of them seemed to see the real horror unfolding. The two remaining vampires closed in on the siblings, moving so fast they blurred against the snow. Steve fired more vials, forcing them back for moments, but their strength seemed endless. One of them grabbed Joanna by the arm, trying to drag her down. She spun, drove her dead man's blood-soaked blade into the vampire's neck. Its piercing scream rang out through the clearing, and Steve seized the chance, delivering a wide, brutal swing of the machete that took its head clean off. The last vampire roared and tackled Steve to the ground again. Its fangs lunged for his throat, when Joanna, aching and furious, hurled the last grenade. The explosion of glass and acidic smoke enveloped the creature, searing its skin. Blinded and disoriented, the vampire staggered, just long enough for Steve to grab it and, with a final surge of strength, drive the machete into the base of its neck and finish the kill. Silence fell heavy over the clearing as the last head was severed from its body. The blood-stained snow seemed to absorb the screams and the torchlight, leaving only the sound of the wind moving through the pines. Steve was breathing hard, the machete still tight in his hand, while Joanna wiped the blood from her forehead with the sleeve of her jacket. Wasting no time, they dragged the bodies into a makeshift pile and set them on fire. The flames crackled, lighting up the stunned faces of a few freed recruits. Thick smoke rose into the sky, carrying with it the end of those ancient predators. The most devoted cultists, once entranced, had fled deep into the forest. Others remained on their knees in shock, unable to grasp what they'd just witnessed. Joanna approached one of them, but all it took was a look to see there was nothing left to say. Blind faith still held them captive. "Let's go," Steve said, his voice rough, tossing one last vial of dead man's blood onto the embers to make sure nothing remained. They left the sawmill burning, the flames reflecting off the snow as they walked toward the road where the Mustang was waiting. Each step felt heavier than the last, their bodies drained, muscles aching, but the weight of duty pushed them forward. When they finally got into the car, Joanna leaned her head against the seat, closing her eyes for a moment. Steve started the engine, its low rumble breaking the silence of the early morning. Whitefish was still asleep, unaware of what had happened in its woods. The Mustang slid down the snow-covered road, pulling away from the distant glow of the fire. Behind them was only the echo of a destroyed cult and a broken cycle. If you thought facing a nest of vampires was already too much, just wait until you see what's coming next. The Myers siblings are about to dive into a brand new nightmare, this time deep in the darkest swamps of the East Coast. Fishermen gone missing, whispers rising from the water, and a melody no one should ever hear. Yeah, this next threat? It has claws, fangs, and a velvet voice. Click the video on the side and come find out what's hiding in the waters of the Great Dismal Swamp. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. Here, every video pulls you deeper into a world where the supernatural is just part of the routine, and the only thing standing between you and the unknown is hitting play.